After this, I did as much as I could to resign myself to the will of God. Although many times I was put in such constraints by creatures that at times I would do nothing but cry. The time also came to have me visited by the doctor, and he judged that it was nothing other than a nervous issue. So he prescribed medicines, distractions, strolls, cold baths. He recommended to my family that they watch well over me when I was surprised by that state. Because, he said, if you move her, you can break her, but not fix her. Since, when I was surprised by that state, I would remain petrified. So a war arose on the part of my family. They prevented me from going to church. They no longer gave me that freedom to be myself. I was watched everywhere, and so they noticed it more often. Many times I lamented to the Lord, saying to him, "My good Jesus, how my pains have increased. I am deprived also of the things dearest to me, which are the sacraments. I had never thought I would reach this point, but who knows where I will end up. Oh, please give me help and strength, for my nature is failing me." Many times he would deign to tell me a few words. He would say to me, "I am your help. What do you fear? Don't you remember that I too suffered from all kinds of people? Some had one opinion about me, some another. The holiest things I did were judged by them as faulty, wicked to the point of telling me that I was possessed, so much so that they would look at me with surly eyes. They would keep me in their midst, but unwillingly, and would plot among themselves on how they could take my life away the soonest, for my presence had become intolerable for them. So don't you want me to make you similar to me by making you suffer on the part of creatures? So I spent several years suffering on the part of creatures, from demons, and directly from God. At times I reached such bitterness from creatures and from the way they thought that I was ashamed of being seen by anyone, so much so that my greatest sacrifice was to appear in the midst of people. The blushing and the confusion were such that I felt dazed. There were more visits from other doctors, but they came up with nothing. Sometimes, shedding bitter tears, I would say to him with all my heart, "Lord, how public my sufferings have become, not only to my family, but also to strangers. I see myself all covered with confusion. It seems to me that everyone is pointing his finger at me, as if these sufferings were the most wicked actions. I myself am unable to say what has happened to me. Oh, please, you alone can free me from such publicity, and let me suffer hiddenly. I pray you, I implore you, answer me." Sometimes the Lord too showed he would not listen to me, and my pains would increase. Other times, then, he would compassionate me, telling me, "Poor daughter, come to me, for I want to console you. You are right that you suffer, but don't you remember that I too, oh, how much more I suffered? Up to a certain point, my pains remained hidden, but when the will of the Father came for me to suffer in public, promptly I went out to meet confusions, opprobrium, scorns, to the point of being stripped naked in the midst of a most numerous people. Could you imagine a confusion greater than this? My nature greatly felt these kinds of sufferings, but I had my gaze fixed on the will of the Father, and I offered these pains in reparation for many who commit the most wicked actions publicly, with open eyes, boasting about them without the slightest blush. I would say to him, "Father, accept my confusions and opprobrium in reparation for many who have the insolence to offend you so freely, without the slightest sorrow. Forgive them. Give them light, that they may see the ugliness of sin and convert. I want to make you too share in those kinds of sufferings. Don't you know that the most beautiful presents I can give to you, the souls I love, are crosses and pains? You are still a little girl in the way of the cross. This is why you feel too weak. Once you have grown up and have known how precious suffering is, then you will feel stronger. Therefore, lean on me, rest, for in this way you will acquire strength. After I spent some time in the state mentioned above, about 6 or 7 months, the sufferings increased more, to the point that I was forced to stay in bed. Often that state of losing consciousness multiplied, to the point that I would almost not have 1 hour free. I reduced myself to a state of extreme weakness. My mouth clenched in such a way that I could not open it at all. And in the few free moments I would have, I was able to take just a few drops of some drink, if I managed at all. And then I was forced to bring it up because of the continuous vomiting, which I have always had. After I remained about 18 days in this continuous state, they sent me for the confessor, so that I could confess. When the confessor came, he found me in that state of dozing. When I came round, he asked me what was wrong with me. Keeping silent about all the rest, and since at that time the troubles of the demons and the visits of our Lord continued, I only said to him, "Father, it is the devil." And he said to me, "Do not be afraid, for it is not the devil, and if it is, Father will free you." So giving me the obedience and marking me with the sign of the cross and helping me to loosen my arms, for I felt my whole body petrified as if it had become one single piece, he managed to restore the motion of my arms and let me open up my mouth, which before had been unmovable to everything. I attributed this to the sanctity of my confessor, who was truly a holy priest. I held this almost as a miracle, so much so that I would say to myself, "See, I was prepared to die because I really felt ill, and if that state had lasted, I believe I would have left life." However, I remember that I was resigned, and that when I saw myself free, I felt a certain regret for not having died. Then, after the confessor went away and I remained free, I returned to the state of before. And so it happened that I spent sometimes 1 week, sometimes 15 days, and even months being surprised by that state every now and then during the day, and I was able to free myself by myself. But when I was found out frequently, as I said before, my family would then send for the confessor, more so since they had seen that the first time I had been freed, while everyone believed that I would never again recover from that state. But then I went down to church and I returned to that state again, and so they would send for the confessor, and then I would be freed. However, it had never crossed my mind that it would take the priest to free me from such a state, or that my malady was an extraordinary thing. It is true that when I would lose consciousness, I could see Jesus Christ, but I attributed this to the goodness of our Lord, and would say to myself, "See how good the Lord is toward me, that he comes to give me strength in this state of sufferings. Otherwise, how could I endure it? Who would give me the strength?" It is also true that when such a state was going to occur in the morning at communion, he would tell me, and in that very state the sufferings would come to me from himself. But I would pay attention to none of this. At the mere thought, sometimes, of telling this to the confessor, I felt I was the proudest soul that existed in the world if I dared to open my mouth to speak of these things, of seeing Jesus Christ. And I would feel such blushing that it was impossible to say anything to that confessor, as good and holy as he was. It was so true that I did not think that it would take the priest to free me, but that this was happening because of the sanctity of my confessor, that when the time came that he went away to the countryside one morning after communion, the Lord made me understand that I was going to be surprised by that state, inviting me to keep him company by sharing in his pains. And I immediately said to him, Lord, how am I going to do this? The confessor is not here. Who is going to free me now? Maybe you want me to die now? And the Lord just told me, your trust must be only in me. Be resigned, because resignation renders the soul luminous, and it keeps all other passions in their place, in such a way that, attracted by those rays of light, I go into that soul, and I transform her completely into myself, and I make her live of my own life. I resigned myself to his holy will. I offered that communion as the last one of my life, and I gave the last goodbye to Jesus in the sacrament. But though resigned, I felt my nature so much that for the whole day I did nothing but cry and pray the Lord to give me strength. In truth, that situation turned out to be so very bitter to me, and without thinking or knowing, I found myself with a new and heavy cross, such that I believe it has been the heaviest I have had in my life. While I was in that state of suffering, as for me, I would think of nothing but dying and doing the will of God. On the part of my family, which also suffered in seeing me in that state, they tried to send for some priest, but one would not come because of this, another because of that. After 10 days came the confessor who used to confess me when I was little, and it happened that he too was able to make me come round from that state. Then I realized the net in which the Lord had wrapped me.